Warning, listening to this show may result in increased levels of inspiration, motivation, and innovation. Side effects can include the immediate urge to take massive action to build a better business and life for yourself and others. You've been warned. Welcome to Influencers Radio with your host, Jack Mize.
And welcome back to another episode of Influencers Radio. You know, one of the most difficult things that we must deal with in life is grief. Loss and grief, something that everyone experiences, yet it's one of the most misunderstood and least talked about subjects. And when I say grief, I'm not just talking about the death of a loved one, because we can experience grief and loss on many levels over many things. Well, today, my guest is Anne-Marie Lockmyer. She is a grief specialist, speaker, and the founder of the Grief and Trauma Healing Network. She's also an award-winning author of the best-selling book, When Their World Stops, The Essential Guide to Truly Helping Anyone in Grief. As a widow herself, Anne-Marie knows the pain and devastation that grief and the losses of life cause, and is living proof that you can go from surviving to thriving. Anne-Marie, welcome to Influencers Radio.
Thank you, Jack. Hello.
Well, I'm glad to have you here because, you know, we're really living in a time that I think people are experiencing exactly what it is that you've helped so many people work through. And really, I think what I'd like to start off is defining grief, because a lot of people associate the term grief with death of a loved one. But grief can be the loss of a job, a divorce, wayward child, and it really seems to be from following you and looking what you're doing. It seems to be the core of grief and loss is, I guess you'd call it the death of hope, right? So let's kick it off by really digging into the misconceptions about what grief is and what grief isn't.
Thank you so much. And you are right, Jack. Grief is so misunderstood. In society, we are taught how to acquire things, right? How to get things, but we're not taught what to do when we lose them. And it's kind of crazy, isn't it? Because we're suffering loss all the time, and loss creates grief. So, what is grief? Well, the Grief Recovery Institute would tell you that grief is the normal and natural reaction to any kind of substantial loss. But I really like this definition too, especially when you think of the times we're living in right now with COVID, because it's also the normal and natural emotional reaction to the change or end of any familiar pattern of behavior. And how many familiar patterns of behaviors have changed for us overnight recently, right, in this past year? So when these changes happen and these hurts happen, these disappointments happen, this is all loss. And these losses, the emotions that are created, are grief. So we have lots of people who are grieving that don't even realize that they're grieving. They just know that they're not feeling good, right? Or they may be sad or depressed, but they don't recognize that it's grief and that it's actually a very normal and appropriate reaction to circumstances.
You brought up some really important points and some of the things that I haven't thought about. And I do like that second definition that you have of grief, because the first one uses that word substantial, and that can be subjective. And I think some people maybe even feel guiltier that they shouldn't be feeling this way over something that, may be substantial to them, but trivial to someone else. So without getting into, what qualifies as grief, because it seems to me that that's a very personal measurement of what you would grieve over. But maybe if you could dig into how that grief affects someone, regardless of the source of it.
Yes, I really like that you clarified that about how it's really to the person if it's substantial or not. And when we're doing a group, when we're working with people, we always tell people in grief recovery, do not compare losses. Because the most important loss is your loss, right? Whatever that person is experiencing, and even right now with COVID, right? We're sometimes saying, well, you may have not had this event that was important to you, or you didn't get to do this, but someone else has it so much worse, right? And so we may negate the way people are feeling when we actually want to acknowledge, no, this is a big deal to you, and acknowledge the emotions and give them a reason to actually, it's okay. All emotions are good. And we don't want to make people feel bad or judge people's grief or reaction.
So maybe we could use COVID as an example, because right now people may not realize that they're experiencing grief because, they may feel that they've lost not just concerned about losing the lives of their loved ones, but they've lost time. They've lost time with loved ones. They've lost time with their hobbies. They've lost time with the things that make them happy. And kind of going back to the top of the show, it's really the death of hope. Hope is diminishing on what they'll be able to get back to.
Yeah, disappointments, unmet expectations. And so depending on what the loss is and what the person, every person's going to respond differently, even if it's the same loss, right? Like, I lost my husband, but someone else who lost their husband, we would both grieve, but we might show our grief differently, right? Even though we're both hurting. So it could be anything from sadness and disappointment, which would be typical anxiety, depending on what the loss is. But it was very interesting. I again, with COVID, I think early on people were feeling this unusual, uncomfortable feeling, and they didn't know what it was. And it really, for so many people, I really believe was grief. It was just a sadness of the things that they were losing, right? The regularity to life. And of course, then you had people who's, they weren't going to school anymore. They lost their jobs. There's just so much going on. But when we're talking about something maybe particularly, and again, we don't want to compare, but the death of a loved one or something to that degree, that kind of traumatic grief actually it impacts people physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. So when you have a traumatic loss like that, and that's what a lot of people don't expect, is it permeates your whole being, and it changes you. And grief takes so much out of you that often when I'm dealing with people, this is, when it's death and trauma related, they think they're losing their minds, or they're surprised that they can't think properly, or they're so fatigued, but they don't understand the toll that grief takes on them. It can be so devastating, and the emotional toll is great. And it's not something when it's to that degree, it's not something that you just bounce back from. You really have to. The only cure for grief is to grieve, and so whether it's devastating or it's not to that point, we actually want to acknowledge it and allow the feelings and recognize them. And see, society isn't good with that because we aren't comfortable with people feeling bad. Right? We always want people to be happy, but we have to teach people that all emotions are good. And so instead of trying to talk people out of sad emotions or difficult emotions, we actually want them to be able to express them, and we want to acknowledge them so that then they can go on to the next emotion, as opposed to just stuffing it or pretending that they're okay.
It really does open up a different perspective, because I think a lot of people sometimes confuse grief or think of grief as being synonymous with depression. And you brought up something that seems to be a distinction, that grief seems to be something that needs to be worked through, needs to, let something play out, whatever that is, versus depression isn't, you wouldn't encourage someone to, well, go ahead, be depressed, get it over with. Right. Mm-hmm. So what would that distinction be when people are thinking, is it grief? Is it depression? And how do you separate those two?
That's a really good question. So there can be people who are certainly struggling with depression, right? And sometimes you need interventions and all that for that. It could be chemically caused, right? There's lots of different reasons for it. But I guess when I'm working with people, when we know we're dealing with grief or loss, and I say, well, in this situation, okay, if you just lost a loved one, or you just ended a relationship, okay, maybe a divorce, or it doesn't have to, it could be a different type of relationship that ended, or something really terrible and painful happened to you, would being depressed or sad be a normal and natural reaction? And it would be. So in that case, we want to allow it, and we want to actually give them a place to express those emotions and work through them. You know, we don't want to judge them. They're appropriate, and they won't be forever if we can work through them, as opposed to what oftentimes we do, grievers, we stuff them, right? Because we want people to think we're okay, because people want us to be okay. So we don't necessarily deal with them, which can even make us more depressed, right? So, because they're in us, but we don't do, or they can even cause anxiety, because they're just emotions that we don't think we're supposed to have. So we just stuff them. Whereas we want to tell people, no, they're normal and appropriate. And, you know, can you imagine how fabulous it would be if, as children, we learned this? To actually express these emotions, and we would be just so much healthier mentally and emotionally in the long run. We're really not, like I said, we really are not taught what to do with these bad feelings. So you can tell I get so passionate about talking about it, because once we have the awareness, it's just eye-opening. It really is.
Oh, it is, because I mean, already the extent of my ability in dealing with someone that's grieving is, you know, it's okay, you know, which is, there's so much more to it. But it sounds like depression, rather than being synonymous with grief, it's almost a symptom of grief, even if it's a temporary symptom. Would that be the case?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I was majorly depressed after my husband died, and I deal with people who are struggling with depression all the time, but it's an appropriate sadness to what their circumstances are, you know, and it doesn't, you don't necessarily come out of it right away, but there are tools that we can do to help you process those things. So it doesn't have to be as bad, that you don't have to be in it as long, but we're actually not just covering it up, we're actually going to deal with it. And there's certainly a time and a place for medication, but it's also completely appropriate to help people, you know, feel the emotions, express them, and then do something with them. And that's what grief recovery is all about, is actually dealing with those emotions. It's all heart, right? It's really not in the head. It's in the heart. Right,
which makes it, to me at least, you know, hard to define or to pinpoint. You're talking about recovery, and, you know, I know we're all familiar with the term time heals all wounds. But I think,
oh boy,
who looks a little deeper than that knows that that's probably not the case. So let's say we're dealing with the death of a loved one. We're dealing with a loss of a job, a divorce. What if time doesn't heal those wounds? And I think a lot of people have gone to the point where they feel like, okay, I need to stop. I need to suck it up and stop moping about this, right? But it's just, you know, it's embedded that there's that unresolved grief, right? So what causes grief to be unresolved? And, you know, how does a recovery program, resolve those issues?
First of all, you know, understanding that time heals all wounds, right? That is one of the, we talk about the myths and unhelpful beliefs of grief, and that is certainly one of them. And it does people who are truly hurting a disservice, because they wonder why they aren't any better. You know, 3 years after my husband died, I wasn't any better. And I was so discouraged, because I felt I should be, right? I should be better with time. And if that was the case, I wouldn't be working with people, 20 years after something's happened to them, right? That's still not resolved. So again, it's a harmful belief, but we hear it all the time. It's not time. It's what you do within that time. Although time can lessen it, right? Possibly. But when you talk about unresolved grief, when we experience these hurts and these losses, oftentimes there's emotions that we need to process. That's what I like to say. So, for instance, there might be expectations that were never met in that relationship, or there might be things that were hurtful that were done by that person or in the relationship. Now, this could be whether it's a death or a divorce, or maybe there's some things that you did that you regret in that relationship. So we can carry a lot of baggage. That's what I like to call it, baggage, right? That we don't even realize. And we don't know what to do with these emotions. We just know that I would say most of the people that I work with, they just know they're stuck. That's what they would say. They know their life isn't where they want it to be. They're surviving often, as opposed to they're just getting by. They're not thriving. They don't want to be where they are, but they have no idea how to get out of it. They don't know what to do, and they don't know why they're feeling that way. So what happens is when we can look at their losses and put emotions to it, and the things that they wish in these relationships, whether it be a death, or again, the end of a relationship. It could be a lack of a relationship. It could be, a medical condition, right? A long-term medical condition. If you can address, what do you regret? What do you wish was different, better, or more? What did you expect that didn't happen, right? Like with my husband, I expected we'd have a much longer future together. Another one of my losses is that I have a son who became mentally ill at 16, and that was a loss. If you have someone in your life that is suffering with a mental illness or a physical illness, that can be a loss. And you had hopes, dreams, and expectations for that person. And to do something with those feelings as opposed to just stuff them. Resolving means actually working through them, validating them, and processing them so you can be free then, free of carrying that baggage that caused the anxiety, the depression, the getting stuck. And I would say that what I hear when we work through this in recovery, the thing I hear all the time is, and this is what I experience, is, oh my gosh, there's been a huge weight lifted from me. I didn't even realize I was carrying all these emotions and feelings until I got rid of them. And there's such freedom in it. There's such freedom. There's so many of us walking around. I call us walking wounded because so many of us have losses that we don't even realize in our lives. And that's part of this process is looking at all the losses in your life. So you may be working with me on one, but we look at all the losses because losses can build on each other. And the whole goal is to get you as emotionally healthy as possible by freeing you from the pain that these things are causing, so that your circumstances don't control you, but you control your circumstances. And that really starts with acknowledging them, acknowledging the emotions, and working through them. It's, and then you have tools to use the rest of your life. So.
Well, yeah. And then I think also to apply in different circumstances. And I have to say, Anne-Marie, I think anyone that has heard you speak, watches your videos, you approach this with a passion. And I think one of the things that's unique, when a lot of people, when they think about counseling, some people have they assume what counseling would be. But the one thing that you bring to this that I think is very different is that, people think when they go counseling that they are going for a sympathetic ear, but, what you do, you bring, not just sympathy, but empathy to this because you've gone through this. And, I think it's, grieving people resonate with you because, you are someone that has been there, has experienced that. You've been to that side. You've gone through that, that horrible time. And you've been a person that brought back a map on how to get out of that. So Could you tell us about what led you to do what you do and help the people you help?
Well, this is not exactly how I thought my life was going to turn out, Jack. I had a lovely family, and then just to try to say it briefly, I was actually out of the country, and I got a call that my husband of 26 years had just suddenly died of a brain aneurysm. And at that moment, my entire world stopped and changed, and everything changed that day. And I was never the same. Life was never the same, and I didn't know how I would ever get through it. And there were many moments where I didn't think I would. And it is an anguish that I really think until you've been there and experienced the death of a loved one, it is very hard to describe, because it goes to a depth in you that I don't even think we know that kind of anguish and pain is possible until something like that happens. And there were many, many days, actually months, where I wouldn't have taken my own life, but if a bus hit me on the way home, I was just fine. I didn't want to go on, and I didn't know how I would go on. But what I also learned early on is that people did not know what to do with me. And it was alarming to me, the things that people would say and do, not because they didn't care, they just didn't get it. And I had said those same kind of things before my husband died, but I thought, maybe I could help them. So I ended up writing a book on how to help grieving people through the first year. And it actually, surprisingly to me, did really well and won some awards. And it's a great little guidebook. It's real simple. It's not the kind of book anyone wants to read, but it's really helpful, because grief makes us so awkward. And I knew that when people saw me coming, they'd turn the other way, because they were so uncomfortable. And it's not that they didn't care, they didn't know what to do. And so I thought, someone's got to help people get comfortable with grief. And so that ended up, with the book doing well, ended up me, exploring and getting more grief education and trauma education, having my own transformational healing experience and getting certified and the method to do that, and more training to kind of just make a really robust program for healing from grief and the losses of life. It's really complete and effective. And it's my greatest joy. Like, I know my clients say to me, I don't understand how you can listen to all this heartache and not be affected by it. And I tell them it's not because I don't care, but when I'm listening to you, I don't see where you are. I see where I know you can be. Right? Because I've been where you are, and I'm living proof that you can thrive and that life can be good again. And especially when it's death related too, it's not about forgetting your loved one. It's actually about remembering them well. So life can be different, and you will be different, but it can still be good. So I get excited to work with people, because it's my greatest joy to watch people have hope and experience healing when they've just felt so stuck and never thought it could get any better. So I love what I do. And I know it sounds crazy, but I get excited about talking about grief and trauma. I love to train therapists, counselors, just get the word out. There's hope and there's healing. You don't have to stay there.
There's something that you said that you talked about. It's not about forgetting, and I don't remember the exact words of forgetting, but the way that you remember them. And to me, I think which is unique to the death of a loved one over job loss or divorce, is it's not just about wanting to move on, but the guilt of maybe wanting to move on, or the guilt of I don't want to not feel this pain, or I'll feel guilty without feeling this pain. I think that'd be something that I'd really like to talk about, because I think that's a big, milestone or fork in the road of resisting. It's not that they want to move on but can't. It's that they're afraid that the guilt that comes along with moving on. How does someone reconcile that?
You described it so well, that we can feel that if we have happy moments, that we're betraying our loved one, right? It means that we don't miss them. And we talk about this. I just did a workshop for, getting through the holidays when you're grieving and things like that. And talking to people and saying, look, please, when you want to cry, but when you want to laugh or you have a happy moment, enjoy it. How many of you feel guilty when you have a happy moment? And, they all raise their hands. Because it's like, if I have a happy moment, then it means that I'm not missing my loved one. And that's not true at all. But that's the kind of expectations and pressure we put on ourselves. And, our loved ones would want nothing more than for us to have happy moments. And being in pain does not mean that we love our loved one even more than, not being in pain means that we don't love them. It is not about forgetting them. And I think that's what oftentimes we think, that when we live forward, and I don't like to say move on, because you don't move on. You live with the loss, and you learn to live through the loss, and you bring a different relationship with that person. They're not with you physically, but they can still move forward with you. And so, wouldn't it be wonderful? And this is what I tell people, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could remove the pain and you were left with the happy memories? How great would that be? And when you think about your loved one, you could smile, right? And enjoy them and bring them forward with you and talk about them. And that's what people want. And we try to lead them there so that they understand you're not leaving them behind. You don't have to feel guilty. You can still love them, but you don't have to have the anguish anymore. And it's just educating them and giving them that permission, right? It's just, boy, I'm telling you, it's so difficult, those feelings and the guilt that we can heap upon ourselves. And they're really unrealistic expectations sometimes that we put on ourselves.
Yeah, I think so. And I think there's probably on the other side of that is, if you don't mind talking a little bit about the expectations of the people around those grieving, because I know your book, When the World Stops, is really focused on people that maybe didn't experience a loss themselves, but the awkwardness, and that is it's uncomfortable, and you can't define what makes it uncomfortable. And I think a lot of it's we just don't know what to say. And there's some people that don't do well. I'm one of those people that I don't do well with sympathy, both giving sympathy or receiving sympathy. It just makes me uncomfortable. And then there's some that are maybe that have their own methods that they think is what they should say, from anything with, oh, don't worry about it, everything will be okay, where they're minimizing the grief. And also maybe a more abrasive way of saying, oh yeah, you think that's bad. I mean, it's just, there's a different sides of it. So maybe if you could spend just a few minutes to go over some of the most important things that the people that aren't necessarily the ones experiencing that grief, but are, wanting to be able or feel maybe helpless a little bit to someone that they care about that's experiencing that grief.
Thank you. It's one of my favorite things to do is to help others, help people who are grieving. So, and you brought up, why are we so uncomfortable? So if I can just address that first, Jack, it's because it hurt. We don't like to see people hurting. That's where it comes from. To see people hurting and not be able to fix it is an incredibly awkward and uncomfortable place to be. It is, isn't it? I mean, look what happens even when children are sad. What's the first thing we try to do? You're not hurt, or it's okay. Have a cookie. We don't want people to be sad. And see, we're teaching them at an early age, it's not okay to be sad. So the first thing that I would tell people is you can't fix it. That's the first thing. You cannot fix it, so don't even try. And get comfortable being uncomfortable, because it is awkward, right? And if you realize you don't have to fix it, that can take some pressure off at least. And then the first thing, too, would be however your friend is behaving is normal. We think, I get all the time, well, they're not grieving properly. And I'm thinking, well, what do you mean? What's grieving properly? Yeah. Well, they're not showing enough emotion. They're not showing enough emotions. Does that mean they're not grieving? Well, they're not grieving the way I think they should, because this person here is too emotional. They're not, or, they seem in denial. Whatever it is, it's normal for them. There is no pattern of grief. It's different for the individual, and people in the same family can grieve differently. As a matter of fact, parents who lose a child, oftentimes we hear about marriages breaking up, and it's not specifically the loss of the child that tends to cause the problems. It's that they grieve differently, right? Where one may be a lot more emotional and the other one is not. And so they think that other one's not grieving the right way. There's a lot of misunderstanding, so we can help them a lot with that. So whatever they are doing is normal and it's right for them. If they want to stay in bed for a week, let them stay in bed for a week. If they want to be busy, let them be busy. Another thing that I say less, do more. There is nothing you can say. So some of the best things you can say is, I have no words. I have no idea what to say to you. I am so sorry. That's it. Because what you said there, Jack, the things that we try to say, well, at least, like, for instance, with my husband, I got, well, at least you were happy, you had a happy marriage. Oh, yeah, that's true. And at least he died fast. I heard that one too. And by the way, all true, but not helpful. So I always tell people, please don't say at least, and don't say, I know how you feel, because you don't know how I feel. You know how you felt. So again, you don't have to say anything except, I love you, I care, I have no idea what to say. And then one of the best things you can do is just give them your gift of your presence. Be there, but don't worry about words, and meet a practical need. What do they need? Do they need someone to clean the house? Could someone watch the kids, bring them meals? Look and find a practical need, running errands, and take care of that. Please don't ask them, let me know if you need anything, because we won't let you know. And half the time we don't even know what we need. So I just encourage people, find something that you can do to help them and just do it. And then probably one of the most important things, if I could just end with this one, is that please remember them after the funeral or the memorial service, because what happens after that, we get all this attention, and then everybody else goes back to their regular life, and we are left with this mess. Our life is devastated because we don't have our loved one, and we don't understand how come everybody else has gone back to being normal. And it can be this is when it can be especially tough for us. So I encourage people to, little reminders to check in, to reach out to them, to remember them at least for the next year, and often, after that as well. So please just remember them, invite them, reach out to them, even if they don't respond to you. You could text them, but you're going to have to remind yourself, because it's going to be really easy for you to forget that they're still hurting. And they may even pretend that they're okay, because grievers are great actors, but they're not.
Well, one thing that I think is important for us to talk about, because it's something that comes up, and I'm sure it can be one of the times that people feel the most alone, is when it gets down the road, especially, we're here near holiday season. Mm-hmm. Those anniversaries of moments when it seems to be triggers of all that intense grief comes back. What can you suggest, or what tips do you have for someone that's grieving that maybe dreading holidays, maybe dreading the anniversary, or maybe dreading a day that is going to be a joyful occasion for everyone around them, and they feel that they need to maybe suffer in silence?
Thank you for acknowledging that they do suffer in silence a lot, especially around holidays and things like that. You're right, where everybody else is joyful. And here we are missing our loved ones more than ever. So these days where you talk about how we know our grief is going to be worse, Jack, I like to call them tug days, temporary upsurges in grief. Because that's what they are. They are an upsurge, and we feel our grief more deeply. And I try to help people understand they are temporary, but they're tough. And the key for dealing with these days, we all have them, is to actually plan for them. And, I have a worksheet where I work with people where we actually plan, what are those days for you? And what are we going to do on those days? Don't let them just happen to you, because we know they're going to be tough. Maybe it's the anniversary of their death. Maybe it's their birthday. Maybe it's your wedding anniversary if it's your spouse. So plan, for instance, if you know it's going to be a tough day, well, maybe you take the day off work because you know it's going to be tough. And how would you like to remember that day? Would you like to go do something that reminds you of your loved one? Pay tribute to them? Who do you want to be with during that day? Pick people who are going to be good for you, not the people that are going to drain you. And you also have to tell people that it's going to be a tough day, because don't expect people to remember it. We get offended often, grievers, that people don't remember, but it's not their fault. And we need to tell people what we need, and if we think we're going to have a tough day. So there's lots of ways. For instance, on Thanksgiving, you know what I did for 4 years to remember my husband? We all do weird things. But I actually took his ashes and I drove him to the beach, and I got a Starbucks peppermint mocha, and I sat on the beach and I listened to music. I sang songs and I talked to him and I cried. But that was my way of dealing with a tough day. And I did it for 4 years. And even though it was hard, it was good, because it was me grieving, and grieving that way helps us heal. When you have a long period like the holiday season, you can try to decide, do you want to do the same traditions? Do you want to create new traditions? Talk to the family members about what they want to do. Decide what you can handle and what you can't. Tell people again what you need. I talk about, I won't go into it now, but writing a grief letter, explaining to people what's going on with you and what you need. And then finding ways to remember and honor your loved one on these special days and through these seasons. There's so much we can do to remember them in these moments that actually pay tribute to them. Yes, they can be sad, but they can also be beautiful. So there's a lot I could say. I don't want to overwhelm you, but I have all sorts of suggestions on how you can remember them and remember these days.
Well, I think, again, that's just one of the things that, something that I haven't really thought about. And I think very few people think about it until it happens, whether it happens to them or someone close to them is experiencing this, and it can be overwhelming. Mm-hmm. I can't even put into words, how important and how remarkable what you do is, because you make the unbearable bearable. What people think is unbearable, that is insurmountable, that they can't get through. If you at least put hope where there may not have been hope. So I'd like to talk a little bit about more the tactical part of what someone can expect when they, work with you through the recovery, because I'm sure you've dealt with so many different types of losses besides the death that maybe they may feel are trivial, but it's not trivial to them. So right. I can't imagine there's something that someone could come to you with and you say, seriously, that's what the problem is?
Yeah. Well, and oftentimes they don't even know what it is. They just know that they don't want to be where they are and they're stuck. That's often what happens. And, I get to say, that, what I do for a living, and this is why I love what I do. I get to heal broken hearts, men broken hearts. Who wouldn't want that job, right? To be able to see that, to give people hope and healing who need it so badly. And it's not that they don't want it. And it's not that they're choosing to stay where they are. They just don't have the tools. And that's my job. And that's what I can give them. And that's why I love this. And it's different than therapy. And I'm not knocking therapy or counseling at all. But grief recovery is very specific. They're action steps. We're actually doing something. And so my first thing in working with someone, and it's a program, it's 6 sessions or it's 2 intensive days. And I do the majority of them online via Zoom. I do some in person, but as long as I can see you, we can connect. But my job is to create a very, very safe space for someone to be able to acknowledge any emotions, any losses, to take a good look at their lives. And maybe they're going to come to me because of the death of a loved one. And so that is a loss. But part of our process is, first of all, educating people on what grief and loss is. So there's an awareness, but then looking at their whole lives. So maybe, like I said, they're going to come for the death of a loved one. But as we look at all the hurts and pains in their lives, they may find, oh my gosh, and that's usually what happens, is people will say, oh my gosh, I have things that I'm still holding on to that I didn't realize were having an impact. And we don't make something where there's not. You can have things that don't trouble you anymore, but oftentimes other things will come up that are still in you and still weighing you down and can have an impact on your current loss. So I might, a perfect example was a woman, she was actually in her 80s and came to me with the death of her husband. But in doing the loss history, we realized that her most painful loss was actually the abusive relationship with her mother. And when we processed that, I'll never forget, she looked at me and she said, "Oh my gosh, 80 years, and I finally have healing. I had no idea." And after that, she didn't even need to process her husband's loss. It was very interesting, but she would have had the tools to do it. So that's why you never know. It could be bullying. I've worked with people, they've been bullied, right? Major health illnesses. You just don't know. However it's impacted you, and it's not about what logically, you should be reacting to. It's what your heart says. So oftentimes we can feel guilty about things that aren't even our fault, but we carry that guilt and regret, and that needs to be processed. And then we can be free. It's just so exciting because the whole purpose of this is that you resolve anything that's left unresolved. You complete it so that you can be as emotionally whole as possible. And then you have tools to use for the rest of your life on any other future pains and losses. So I love what I do.
Oh, well, that's very clear. And the passion that you have, and this is so applicable even to someone who's not experiencing grief. I mean, I'm someone who didn't realize that this existed. I mean, I knew there was grief counseling, but whenever I've heard that term, I've always thought it's, rent a sympathetic ear, that'll spend a day with you saying, now, there, everything will be okay. And you don't have to feel like you're burdening someone else. But it's much more than that. And I'm sure that you could be a surrogate for that too, because there are people that won't turn to friends because they don't want to burden them. And I think, that's probably a big part of what you do. They may come to you for that concern, but to be able to actually work through it with process and purpose, to me, is just, far beyond what, I imagined something like a grief counseling to be.
Yeah, it's really, it's an involved process, and there's exercises, and it's action-based, and it's incredibly empowering. It really is. It allows someone to take control of their circumstances. And it's truly a beautiful, beautiful process. And it's a wonderful relationship that we have together, because we have to trust each other. And it's my job to guide people, to give them gentle pushes. And, as much as people want to get better, it can be scary, right? Sometimes to do this kind of thing. It takes courage to want to do some of these steps. And that would be completely normal to be a little fearful. And so it's my job to make sure that they're safe. They're safe, and that we do this together, that they know that they do not have to do this alone, and they don't have to stay where they are.
Well, I can say one thing that you've opened my eyes to is that the grieving process, or at least grieving recovery, isn't necessarily something that you have to think of as a mournful process. And it takes me back to funerals or memorial services that were full of laughter and how healing that was. Mm-hmm. So when someone comes to you with this, it's not necessarily a dark and mournful experience, but something tells me that that's probably an experience that people don't expect. Would that be correct?
Yeah, again, they're not sure what they're going to get, right? It's hard to explain this process until you've been through it. And so, they're kind of like, okay, what exactly is going to happen here? And they just have to trust me. And I'd say it's a place of rawness, of realness, of authenticity for them and for me, where we acknowledge all emotions and we share all emotions. So, yes, there can be times of sadness, right, and of deep grief, but there can also be times of celebration and joy and laughter and also, trying to figure out who we are and who we can be because of this loss, how this loss can actually help us to be better versions of ourselves. These usually aren't things we would ever choose to go through, Jack, right? But if we've got to go through them, then as we heal and we get rid of a lot of the of the grief and the pain, then we can actually rebuild and use it for our good. And that can be really hopeful. And that's what I love when I do see people smiling and laughing and their eyes sparkling. I know we're on the right track and we've done it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And it just must be wonderful for you to experience that as well. And it's probably something that very few people can even imagine how that must feel to be able to have that kind of impact on others. And, that's why I really think of you as an influencer and
thank you.
Someone who has a passion around making what people feel unbearable to make it bearable and beyond is just wonderful. How can someone find out more about Anne-Marie Lockmyer and get involved in what you're doing, or maybe, share your information with a friend that they may not know what to say?
Thank you. Well, my website is griefandtraumahealing.com. So griefandtraumahealing.com. And my email address and everything is on there as well. And there's a free ebook there about understanding grief. There's some free handouts there. There's all sorts of testimonies on what I do and that if people want to know more. And also, I have a complimentary consultation. It's like a discovery call. If anyone just wants to talk to me to see, is this a good fit for them? Are they ready for this? And I love to talk to people, and I always talk to people before I'll work with them because we want to find out, first of all, is this program right for you? And if it is, great. And am I right for you? But the other thing is, Jack, is that if I'm not right for them or this isn't the program for them, then I want to help them get the help and support they need. So I'm always happy to be a resource. So if it's not me, then let's figure out what else that you could use. So people can schedule that. And I'm just happy to dive deeper into their stories and see what might be best for them.
Well, fantastic. We'll put that on the show notes. Anne-Marie, I have to thank you for coming on and sharing this. I know we just scratched the surface of the ways that you can help and the depth of this topic. And I just want to thank you because you affect not just, the people that are grieving, but, you have an impact on the lives of the people that love them as well. And that's, the definition of an influencer to me. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me and allowing me to share. I really appreciate the opportunity.
All right, folks. Well, there you have it. Definitely check out Anne-Marie Lockmyer. We'll have all the links. And if you are experiencing grief, or know someone that's experiencing grief, not just with death, but with job loss, divorce, abuse, trauma, or just from what's going on right now with this COVID pandemic, I encourage you to take a look and see what Anne-Marie is talking about, because she has just some tremendous information on her site and on her video. So definitely check it out. Until next time on Influencers Radio, remember, you are the only real game changer.
You've been listening to Influencers Radio. To get all past shows and updates on future shows, visit influencersradio.com today.